Hello, everybody. Don't mind me while I open up this gift. No, I'm just teasing. I'm not going to do that right now. So I am here to talk about AppSec looking sick. Some of my bios recently have said that I am the CTO of BitDiscovery. I am not. That has been sold. I am now the deputy CTO of Tenable. So don't repeat that whole dirty rumor about BitDiscovery because it is now gone. But more importantly, I'm here to talk about AppSec in general. So I've noticed something weird. There's something weird that's been going on. And it's been happening for a while, and it's been brewing inside of me. Like I just can't figure it out because it doesn't feel like it's one problem. It feels like there's many sub things that are going on with it, and I kind of wanted to start digging in and figuring it out, like what is really happening here. And it feels like a mix of incentives and technical problems and a bunch of different things that are happening at the same time. So let's start with the elephant in the room. And I'm sure some people will like, hey, that doesn't apply to me. We're definitely doing a risk-based approach to Infosec. You are definitely not doing an information-based risk assessment program at all. You aren't. And I'll prove it to you, so don't worry. You might be doing some fair methodology in like a microcosm or something, or as an experiment or a lab, but you're definitely not doing it at scale. No one is. It's not your fault, and I'll explain why. So let's start with the fundamental problem that's driving a lot of these issues. So some people keep saying like we need more headcounts in security. We need more people in security. And the face that actually sounds like very good advice, and I would call this the hiring your way out of the problem. Like, if we could just throw more bodies at this thing, I think we could finally get ahead of security. The problem is, I've been asking a lot of high-end security people if they've been noticing the same thing. I've actually been seeing a degradation as opposed to an improvement in overall security expertise per capita of the people that I talk to within these megacorps in general. So if you go talk to, let's say, the average practitioner, somebody who manages firewalls or switches or does an AppSec program or whatever, they tend to know less than we knew 10 years ago. Not more than 20 years ago, which is good. So at least there's some improvement overall, but less than 10 years ago. So we are seeing a degradation. And I'm like, why is that happening? I just don't understand. Like, I go in these meetings and I'm saying things that we have known to not been true for like at least 20 years. Like, you can't run 2 websites on one IP address. Like, what? What are you talking about? Of course you can do that. And so there's something happening, and I'm just like, what is causing this weird delay or decrease in capabilities? And what I think is happening is there's a brain drain. So people at the very, very top end of the industry are starting to age out. They're starting to do other things. So they're no longer hands on keyboard. They're no longer actually doing AppSec or network security or whatever they're supposed to be doing, because that's their calling. That's what they're really, really good at and passionate about. And that's what they got started in this industry. And they started the industry. What they're doing now is they're becoming executives, or they're aging out entirely and just retiring, or they're becoming VCs. I had a conversation with somebody who's only 1 year shy of me in this industry, so 27, and me in 28 years in Infosec. And he said he's going to start a VR company and he's leaving. And this is happening all over the place. And so I think that very top cream of the crop, they're just leaving. They're moving somewhere else. And so that leaves the second layer down, which is the people who come up just beneath them. And what's happening to them is they're turning into managers. They're turning into CISOs. They're turning into VPs of engineering or whatever. And they're not like backfilling those people with like really solid people. They're backfilling them with people who they have to put in that seat. Where are they getting them? Well, they're getting them from colleges for the most part. And when I talk to high-end CISOs who actually know what they're doing, who actually measure these kinds of things, I ask them, like, are you getting good people out of these colleges? And the answer is no, because I'm not doing that, because they're terrible. I am not getting them out of colleges, because if I get them out of colleges, I have to entirely retrain them because they don't know what they're doing. It's effectively like getting a brand new off-the-street person. In fact, in some ways worse, because they have a lot of bad assumptions. I'd rather poach them from somebody else. Just go get them from somewhere else, which means you're seeing a consolidation of talent in a couple of companies that can afford it, and all of the rest of them you're seeing a degradation. And so what happens, I got a little bit of flack. I talked about this last week. And someone in the audience said, it's like, well, the problem, it's not like we need every single person to be an expert. It's not like we have like experts, a doctor that's an expert in everything. It's like, no, no, no. This is much more analogous to handing somebody a knife and pushing them into an emergency room and say, just go for it. Because if you believe that security matters at all, and I tend to think it does matter quite a bit, you probably don't want to have the most critical parts of your infrastructure managed by people who literally have never done that job before and aren't well trained by the people above them, because the people above them aren't well trained or are very less trained than they should be. So part of it is also coming from there's a move. When I got started, it was all about being interested in it. If you're really interested in security, you go into security. It's kind of a fun thing. You don't get paid for it. You just kind of hack on stuff and you find cool stuff and you write research papers and you go up to conferences. That's it. There really was no money in application security. Surely in not application security, a little bit in network security. Nowadays, you get paid very well to be in security. So now people are seeing it more as a profession. So you go into it for the 9 to 5, you go home, you have a beautiful house and your kids, and you never think about security the rest of the time. Maybe occasionally there's a P1 issue and you have to stay late or something, and that's it. That is just not, you don't see these crazy LAN parties you used to see. You don't see people just hacking all day to make some little widget turn. I mean, it does happen, but it's way less as a percentage than it used to be. It used to be that's all you'd see at hacking conferences. That was what it was like. So now it's a quantity over quality. And can you blame a CISO? A CISO has to put bodies in the seats. And now I'll talk about bad CISO incentives. So these are the real incentives of a CISO. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about you if you're a CISO in the audience, obviously. I'm talking about every other CISO in the entire world. So first of all, your first incentive is do not get fired. You don't want to get fired. That's not good for you. Makes a lot of sense. So how do you not get fired? Well, you got to look good. You got to look good for your board, the executives. Just don't say anything too dumb. Show up with pretty graphs. Those graphs don't actually have to mean anything or say anything useful. Truly, they don't, because no one's really fact-checking security people. So you're just like, okay, well, the CISO is saying whatever they're saying today, so I guess fine, I guess we're good today. They seem confident, okay. Anyway, get them out of here as quickly as possible so we can get to the actual business. And even if this is detrimental and even truly bad for security, it truly doesn't matter. You just don't want to get fired, right? That's number one. Number two, don't increase your personal liability as a CISO. You don't want to be in a position where you're going to end up in court. You don't want to be in a position where you're more likely to take flack for whatever happens, which means you need to leave in 18 months. You're supposed to get in there, you want to do a couple projects, and then you want to leave. But it also means that you don't want to have any knowledge of any potential threats for which you have not tried to solve, which means the less you know, the better. Next, you're supposed to quit before the bad thing happens. So that's the 18 months thing. Get out of there. Do your business, do the 2 or 3 projects. Typically, the best kinds of projects to pick are going to be infrastructure projects, typically firewalls, upgrade from top layer to Cisco or whatever. Upgrade from the old antivirus to the new antivirus, 1 or 2 things, maybe 3 if you're really, really feeling like that's gotta get it in there for the resume. But that's it. Don't do anything more. If you do anything more, you're actually increasing your personal risk. Get out of there. Get out of there. Take the next job, okay? So obviously I'm not talking about you if you're a CISO, because I know you're doing a really good job. So my little slice of the world is called EASM, External Attack Surface Management, which is basically just find assets that are on the public internet. And so here's some more terrible things. So again, I said, if you know about any vulnerability, then that increases your personal liability, because then you have to go do something about it. And keep in mind, your people are actually not qualified anymore to do those types of things, or at least not as qualified as they were even 10 years ago. And we all know those people. And so as a CISO, you don't want to know about more liability. So what does EASM show you? It shows you a whole bunch more assets, for which are you really not going to run scans on those things? Because now when the bad thing happens, the executives can say, well, why weren't you scanning that thing? Well, okay, so I don't want to know more about my assets. That makes no sense. Why would I ever want to know more about more of my liabilities? That doesn't make sense. So my personal liability goes up if I find out about anything that I shouldn't find out about. So why would I ever spend money trying to find more vulnerabilities? Makes no sense, okay? All right, next. Let's say I could get past that objection. Let's say that I could wave a magic wand and all those incentives were totally fixed or whatever, and you wanted to scan everything. And I truly mean everything, every port on every single IP address, on every single machine, on the public internet, it all wanted to be scanned, or at least inside your organization. Let's just turn it on. So first of all, you can't. First of all, you don't know where everything is because you don't have that ESM project because that last problem. Secondly, you can't because I've actually asked a bunch of scanning companies now, what would happen if I wanted to turn on, I don't know, a couple of billion IPs, call it 4 billion, just bam, turn them on. What would happen? And the answer is they can't. They literally cannot do it. They might be able to do thousands more customers, maybe a million, couple million more on a stretch basis if they really had to in a pinch. But if you're talking about a billion, all of a sudden all their infrastructure just falls down. It just cannot work. So it's just not practical. You just can't do it. But even if you wanted to, you couldn't afford it. It's way too expensive. It's unfathomably way too expensive to start scanning all of your infrastructure. So unless the costs come wildly down somehow, like we figure out how to commoditize scanning in general, it's not going to happen. And then even if you wanted to, now you end up with all these vulns. And I already told you that your people aren't qualified to be doing what they're doing. They're the guy with a knife in the emergency room just stabbing at somebody, hoping it's going to do something, right? They don't have the technical capability to do this, let alone fix these new vulnerabilities that have just come out. And these vulnerabilities are going to be crazy. They're going to be every kind of vulnerability because these are all the old exploits from antiquity, because these are machines you haven't played with in a long time. They've just been sitting out there forever. These are old, antiquated boxes that are very frail. Your employees are definitely not qualified to manage these things. Everybody happy so far? By the way, I decided, because I gave this presentation earlier last week, you have the opportunity to give a really uplifting talk, or really kind of let's get to the meat of things kind of thing, and kind of a downer talk. So I'll let you decide which one this is. So next, I've been harping about this thing at this conference. I just went back and checked the old footage since 2014. So this is 8 years of me talking about this, and this has not gotten better. But I finally figured out a way to explain it that might actually resonate a little bit better. So what does a high, a critical, a red, a 9.4, a 94, or an 83, or whatever, a 5, a C-, a B+, a CVSS 2, a 8, or whatever, what do these things actually mean? What do they actually mean? And I'm serious, because when I look at those scores, I'm confused. Well, what does that mean in context of this actual box? Because if this box is sitting here unconnected to the internet, am I really worried about somebody running a command injection from the public internet? No, that makes no sense. It's irrelevant to the business at whole. And you can prove this because it turns out that all of these things, all these rating systems, are not correlated to losses if you look at the insurance claims. So this is just garbage information. It's actually kind of running you astray. And I don't mean like slightly astray. I mean, it might be exactly the wrong thing to be working on. You might actually be working on things that you shouldn't be working on. And furthermore, a lot of things that might be somewhat low from whatever these random scores tend to mean might actually be extremely critical because it's on your homepage or something. And if you're Facebook or something and you're massive, that might be worth fixing, because you have to assign a risk not just of the bad thing happening, but also in context of the business or whatever the loss potential is. So that's always bugged me about it. I call it now stoplight security. And this thing has got to go. And it's got to go quickly. But I'll explain why, because a lot of people still don't believe me when I talk about this. I actually have math now to prove how broken this model actually is. So let's say you have a vulnerability that's an average vulnerability that's 5 on the vulnerability scale, whatever that means, from 1 to 10. So let's say the average full replacement in eBay of a laptop, some old crappy laptop that's an average laptop you find in some stodgy old company or something, is about $100, right? This is not like a really dangerous thing if this thing happens. You could literally throw it in the trash, no one would even notice. So are you telling me that the worst vulnerability on the planet, the world-ending vulnerability, the one we're all worried about, is only worth double that? Is only worth $200? Does that make any sense whatsoever? Because that's what the math says. If you say one thing is a 5 and the worst thing that could possibly ever be true is a 10, and the average replacement cost of your equipment is $100, that doesn't make sense. It's obviously not $200. It's some number wildly more. And when I talk with data analysts who actually build these algorithms out and like to try to come up with these numbers, they'll do crazy things like multiply numbers by like 1.3. I'm like, where did this number come from? And they're like, I don't know. You want to change it? And I'm like, what do you mean want to change it? Where did it come from? And they're like, well, you know, it looked good. But I'm like, well, what happens if it's a $100,000 loss? They're like, well, we could put a multiplier in there. I'm like, no. No. It's not exponential just because you choose it to be exponential. It's got to have some business context. And honestly, that's where all the best thinking is in this industry is like, well, we can make it a bigger number. Like, no, you can't do that. I mean, not reliably, not get good data out of it. So here's another one, and this one is even more terrifying to me. So if you get a whole bunch of A's, whatever that means, and you get one F, and this is the world-ending F. This is the worst thing we all agree is the worst thing on the internet. This will absolutely shut your company down. It turns out you need around 10 A's, where you average it out, and it's an A. And so what that means, you're actually incented to grow your attack surface and get more very slight vulnerabilities to average out the F's so that you get an A. Do you see the problem with that? That is insane. That is insane. This stoplight security is garbage. It's got to go. So the descent into madness. Let's talk about WAFs for a second. All right. You thought this? Oh, it gets worse. Okay, so first of all, your team doesn't have the skill necessary to run them. They don't. If they once did, 10 years ago, let's say, when there was reasonably good expertise at the low end of where you'd put an average analyst in the job position of actually running a WAF, you don't have that now. They are not that qualified now, which means, and actually running a WAF is a little complicated because you actually kind of have to understand how web applications work. You have to understand web application flows. You have to understand how your company works and its business model. Because if you just turn off, people being able to upload JavaScript into web pages, you would have broken all of eBay back in the day, right? That's probably not a wise business decision. So, second problem is WAVs themselves are complicated. You can actually break functionality in very strange ways without realizing it using a WAF. And it's those kinds of things that will like sneak up on you 6 months, a year later, like, why are we getting no analytics on this website? Well, we put in this cross-site request forgery token or something and it broke everything. And like, well, you can't just arbitrarily start adding stuff without knowing every bit and byte and really understanding HTTP headers, understanding what happens if you insert a content security policy, for God's sakes. You can actually break a lot of stuff. Like Google Analytics just disappeared for 6 months. Like, we can't get that data back. It's not like it's gonna magically appear if you just fix something. They're also very, very expensive on a per machine basis. So if you want to WAF everything, the most hilarious thing is you just can't. You literally can't. It's not just because they're expensive though. So I talked with the biggest WAF vendors in the world. I'm like, well, what would it take to WAF, I don't know, like 4 billion IPs? And they're like, you can't. I mean, it's not, we'd have to fill up like all the Amazon data centers with just WAFs to do that. Like it would be totally impossible, which I guess is what Cloudflare is trying to do. But I mean, it's just, we're not gonna get there. We'll get somewhere, we'll WAF some things, we're not gonna get there. We're not gonna WAF everything. But, so I've been thinking about this for a while. If I have a new O day or like 0.0001 day, like it just came out, and I fire it at a WAF at the exact same time that I also fire a patch at the WAF. So I'm patching it and I'm firing an exploit at the exact same time. Well, who wins? It seems like the patch should go through relatively quickly. How quickly should it go through? Well, it turns out the time it takes to even log into a WAF is, if you're doing it over like SSH or something, is around a second, just around a second. To apply the patch to the backplane, it's multi-seconds, 2 seconds at the minimum, let's say. For me to fire my exploit through the WAF is 0.02 seconds. So I am 2 orders of magnitude faster than you can possibly patch. So it doesn't matter how good your WAF is, you're never, ever going to beat that O day. So this isn't the right way to handle like brand new exploits, especially if somebody's very quick about turning it against you. So that's kind of a minor issue, but it's still one that I have not heard a good solution for. So Back to no one prioritizing risk. So you're all like, no, but I am. I really feel like I am. You're not. So if you don't know where your assets are, you aren't scanning everything, which is important because what if all of those vulns that are going to get you compromised are on the machines that you're not scanning, or on ports that you don't even know exist, on machines that you haven't seen in years, or no one even knows exist because the people who used to manage them are long gone, right? So how do you know that you're fixing the ones that should be fixed if you don't know where the other ones are that should be fixed? How are you measuring them against each other if you don't know what to measure it against? So you're not doing risk, you're just guessing. You're maybe making good guesses in some cases, but still it's just a guess. And you're not prioritizing the risks according to the business needs. To me, this is not the answer. This is not a risk-based approach to security. If you don't know where your assets are, and that you know there are vulnerable assets out there that you aren't scanning, then you're effectively just saying, I hope I quit first, right? I hope I get the hell out of this company before anybody notices because this is going to go terribly wrong. So this is the whole you write 3 letters thing. I don't know if you heard this anecdote, but like basically you got to get out of this company or blame it on the last guy because, oh, I just got here like 2 months ago. It's like, oh, thank God. But you basically have got to get out of that company as quickly as possible if this is your plan, which is not a very good one. So our current conversations that we have with executives. So this would be like an average conversation you might have if you walk in, if you're the chief information security officer talking to the CFO, you'd say, well, we've got 2 command injections, 3 SQL injections, 1 cross-site scripting or reverse forgery, and misconfigure htaccess file in Apache, so want $50,000 to change our grade from a B- to a B+. And they're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you sound like you're an idiot. I mean, you sound like you're just speaking technobabble just to piss me off. So I went and I talked to this board member who became the CEO of a company, a security company of all things. And I'm like, so how do you feel when people come to your office and they say stuff like this? Like, what's the impression you got? He's like, well, as a board member, I kind of thought it was funny, and I just sort of laugh them off, and I just kind of wanted them out of the room. Like they're funny because they're like really passionate about what they're doing, but they obviously aren't moving the needle to the company at all. So just get them out, right? So that's obviously not great. That was his impression at the time. Just get him out of the room as quickly as possible. Give him the 5 or 10 minutes to give his couple of dumb slides with his graphs that don't mean anything, and then get him out of here, right? Now, as a CEO, he's like, they absolutely royally piss me off. They come in there, they start telling me these crazy things that are happening, and I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And from the CFO's perspective, it's even worse because we don't understand what their job actually is. They are the real risk officers of the company. Like, we are just the security risk officers of companies. They have to do all the other kinds of risk, and there's a lot of other kinds of risk out there. So what I would prefer is if we had this conversation. We have $2 million of expected loss over the next 12 months and like $50,000 to remediate that. And so they're not gonna go, cool. They're gonna say, let me see your math. Like, I wanna see how you came up with those numbers. And the numbers should be, on the expected value of loss, should be something like the cost of remediation pre-compromise is the cost. So that's the $50,000 to remediate the threat against the expected value of loss post-compromise, which is a mix of how bad the thing is times likelihood. That's it. That's the math. And so if you can get anywhere near correct answers, anywhere near, they're going to say, well, that's good enough, or they'll say, well, come back with better numbers, or like something like, well, our fully loaded head count is $120 an hour, not $100 an hour, or whatever. They'll correct your math, but it's math. So I went down and I sat down with this guy who's outside counsel for Samsung, also a CPA, also a lawyer. He's an amazing guy. I just love this guy. And I sat him down with my math, and I said, all right, so let's say I have a bunch of vulns, and I had like a little toy model of like 10 vulnerabilities on this little graph plotted against each other. And I said, okay, which one of these would you fix? And I was expecting them to say anything above the efficient frontier of a 45-degree angle curve, which basically says if it costs you more than it's going to cost the company to fix, then don't bother, right? Is what I was expecting them to say. And he said, well, what kind of company is it? I'm like, oh, it's like a little tiny toy company. It doesn't really matter. And he's like, okay. I'd fix every single vuln. I'm like, what? No, I totally missed it. Hold on, let me re-explain what I'm talking about. So I re-explained the whole thing to him, and he's like, Yeah, I got you, Robert. I'd fix every single vuln. I'm like, okay, I fucked up again. Let me try it again. He's like, no. I understand what you're saying. I don't think you understand what's happening though. You said it was a tiny little company, right? And I said, yeah, why would that matter? He's like, well, that means it's pre-public. That means it's got a valuation attached to it. And if you just pick like an average multiple, like 10x or something, then all of a sudden all your vulns shift up by 10x. And suddenly everything fits above the efficient frontier of that curve. I'm like, holy shit. Of course you're right. Of course you're right. That's exactly how business thinks about things. And so we can finally start providing value to companies. Truly, we can actually increase the valuation of companies. Like, we are actually fundamental to improving the value of companies. Really, really, really. It's not bullshit if we can get the math right. So, eventually, someday, I want CISOs to decide what to not fix, because there's a lot of vulnerabilities that are not worth fixing. And you know that to be true. You know that there's some vulns that you could spend all week working on and it's not gonna change the needle at all. Bad guys aren't using them, they're internal machines, it just doesn't matter. But I also want CISOs to understand that they can improve the value of the company. They can actually shift the entire value of the company up, because only then can they say, well, you added a whole bunch of more machines. You bought a company, let's say. Well, great, I need like 20 more people. You just increased the risk to this company by hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, I need more people to go manage this. And they'll go, yeah, that actually makes sense. Like, I can actually see the ROI associated. If I give you 20 people, suddenly our risk, instead of going up $100 million, it only went up $20 million or something. That's a great ROI. That's an important investment to the company because it actually improves our valuation. So, cyber insurance. We've been talking about this one for a while. I am here to add more gloom and doom to your radar. So, you know you need cyber insurance, and if you don't know you need it, I'm going to explain why. Your customers, every customer that you have, for the most part, is going to require that you have cyber insurance going forward. They're going to say something like you have to have a minimum of $1 million per incident and 3 to 5, maybe a $10 million total policy. And if they're a really big customer, they're going to ask to be named as the first to be paid out in the case of a breach or something, right? If you've never seen these contracts, go down to your sales team. I promise you they've seen these contracts. They all exist. Which means your entire net revenue is based on you having cyber insurance. Very, very important. So we all know that you aren't documenting things, you're not instrumenting things properly because you don't have the right people and you don't have EASM and you're not scanning everything and you're not WAFing everything and all the problems I talked about before, right? So you're gonna get compromised. That's what's gonna happen. You're going to get popped eventually. It's kind of an eventuality. And by the way, don't feel bad about that. Go down to any Fortune 500, go to the basement down with the IT team, and just look at the stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of machines. They're all running slow, or have a pop-up, or they lost some data and they can't get it back, or whatever. All those things have malware. Every one of them. All of them have malware. So anybody who says that, like, oh, we never got compromised, that's absolutely bullshit. They just go down there. Just talk to your IT team. Of course you're compromised. You're all compromised 100% of the time. Every one of those Fortune 500s is compromised. Every fucking one of them. Unless they're doing some drastic stuff, they're going to be compromised. So you will get breached. Oh, and by the way, the reason we know that this is true, as opposed to just think it's true, is during the pandemic, one of my buddies who does a lot of internet telemetry based on malware, he noticed that as soon as people started working from home, all these companies were forced to find laptops out of the blue. Like, where do we find laptops? Oh, here's a stack of old laptops. That's great. Just go up there and just start throwing them at people. And all of a sudden, all these antiquated old pieces of malware that were long lost to history are suddenly beaconing out from these networks. Like, why is this happening? They're like, oh, these old machines are all over the place. So this is definitely happening. So you will be proven negligent, but that's okay, because what's going to happen is the insurance providers will say, we're going to pay out anyway. They're going to give you the money anyway, because they want this to be a real business. They really want cyber insurance to exist. It's a real thing. They want you to believe it's a real thing, and the only way for them to get the news out that cyber insurance is a real thing is to pay people. Unless it's like a nation state or something that's directly attacking you, like a specific version of Stuxnet that was purpose-built just for you by, some foreign nation or something, you're going to get money. You're going to get your money back. Okay, so you're going to trigger the claim, and you're going to go, yeah, please give me my money back. And what they're going to do is say, great, here's your money, but you now have a timer. That timer is from now till the end of your policy date. Because after that point, you're not going to get cyber insurance twice. You're not going to get it a second time. And if you remember the very first bullet, you need it. Because if you don't have it, your customers are going to say you're in breach of contract, or they're not going to renew. Because they're going to ask for your insurance policy. They're going to ask to be named on that insurance policy that doesn't exist anymore. So at first I was thought, okay, well this isn't like completely true. I hope this isn't true. And I started talking about this back in Germany, and I met some guy. He's like, Robert, this is more true than you know. What happened is we triggered our insurance policy, and we went to 15 different insurance providers before we found one who was willing to give it to us, but only under the guise of we had to buy this enormous mega policy, this like way, 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 way bigger than anything we'd ever want in any other circumstance, huge insurance policy that was 10% of the entire revenue of the company just to get it, right? And the only reason they got it was because of all the other insurance. They didn't even get it for I'm sure the company didn't understand that they were accidentally giving them cyber insurance that they should not have been giving them. That's how hard it is to get cyber insurance. So you both have to have it, and you also have to not use it. Do you see what I'm saying? Which means you actually have to do security again. You can't just rely on cyber insurance anymore. It's weird, right? They're kind of making us do our job. So they will run our industry, by the way. I know that people are talking about this a little bit. So I actually talked to the cyber insurance industry quite a bit. Like Chubb, AIG, Esurance, and Cysurance in particular, the woman that runs that, I had a good conversation with her. I asked her, like, do you feel comfortable with the idea that you can tell the difference between good product and bad product? She's like, yeah, I think so. I'm like, okay, do you feel comfortable with the idea that there is such a thing as a good policy and a bad policy? She's like, yep. I'm like, do you feel comfortable reviewing people's policies? Yes. Do you feel comfortable writing policy? She's like, no, because there's liability associated with that. I'm like, okay, so the only difference between what you're willing to do and not willing to do is you're willing to give all of the liability back to the client. You're still going to control whether they have good policies or not. You're just not going to write it for them. And if there's anything bad in there at all, they're on the hook, not you. That's just good business. I mean, they're going to run our industry. They're going to tell everybody what to buy and how to install it and how to run it. Pretty much everything you want to know is going to come from them because we're not doing our job. So briefly to paraphrase the problems and a couple other things I want to talk about. We have talent issues. We don't have any anymore. Very few people are coming up that are very good. The CISO incentives suck. No one knows what they own. No one wants to scan anything. No WAS company can scan everything, can protect anything rather. That's actually a typo. Et cetera, right? All this stuff is broken. This is terrible. And this is kind of, I think we're all okay with this, which is even weirder. Like everyone's going through their day going, yep, I mean, I have a job and my vuln report says I got a B+, whatever that means, and so I'm good because I'm not gonna get fired today. And that's just kind of how things are. And you're occasionally forced to go fix something which you probably aren't fixing. The dev team is forced to go figure it out, and that's okay. That's our job. That's what we do now. And frankly, we're not helping our own industry. We're not actually pushing the needle, and the business is at best rolling their eyes at us saying, please God, can SecDevOps take over? Can someone else who understands, can IT do security's job for them? Can the insurance company do it? Because anyone can do a better job than we're doing. That's where things are today. So things I intentionally left out during this, but I think are worth mentioning just sort of as an aside. So there's a lot of talk about shifting left. I think shifting left probably does work. I think it does. I don't have good data on it, but that doesn't mean anything. It's relatively small, and that's actually the problem with it. If it were bigger, if a lot of people used it, if it was used for a long time, I might have better data on it, and I could say definitively if it worked or doesn't work. But what I do know is that we have 20 years of technical debt, which means that if you install it today everywhere, you're still only affecting day 0 and beyond. Everything before that, you're still screwed. So while it might work, it's only going to work from now on, or whatever places you happen to run it on. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying that. I am saying that it doesn't fix any of the problems that currently exist, which is an enormous amount of problems. I hope you agree. So SecDevOps, since I mentioned it, and it's all the hotness, I, again, think this does work, but possibly not for the reason most people think it works. I think this actually just shifts where the problems lie and shifts the attack surface elsewhere, which is good in the sense that it stops people from attacking the things that they're used to attacking, and it makes it harder. There's usually like one more layer between you and the thing, and sometimes it has some shift left stuff built into it, and that's good, I think. I don't have data for it, but I think it's good. And so that obfuscation, although people say it's not a security measure, it definitely is a security measure in certain contexts, and I think this is one of those contexts. And then internal threats. So while I do agree internal threats are real, if you look at the insurance claims associated with it, they're small compared to external threats. So yes, I do think you should care about it because I do think there's bad things that can happen. And furthermore, things like nation states. If you're like a government or something, this whole deck isn't for you because you don't care about the money aspect of things. But if you're at all in retail or anything that transacts in cash, this is kind of a big deal. And so if that's your major concern, internal threats, unless you're talking about something like the secret sauce, like the Campbell's soup recipe or something, or the Coke recipe, it probably doesn't matter nearly as much, statistically speaking, as external threats. Let's say you wanted to do it in a microcosm as opposed to a macro environment. You might say that there are certain machines that are worth more because they are in the production LAN, let's say, or because they have a certain amount of PII on them, or because they have an attack chain that is attached to a bunch of other things that are important. Those things that are important have a net value of blah. The percentage likelihood of attacking one from another is whatever it is, 10%, 50%, whatever the number is. Then you aggregate the score, and then that comes up with a value. The problem is, none of this is automated. None of this is automated. Because what I just described is great in theory until you actually sit down and practice and actually try to do the math on paper. Woof. Holy cow. I mean, it's enormous. And it's sort of self-referential, like really complicated math, actually. So I would not recommend ever trying to do this. And by the way, this is actually my biggest complaint with FAIR. The guys who wrote FAIR are geniuses, absolutely brilliant, brilliant people. I really, really like what they've done. The problem, it is clearly written from an academic perspective. If you actually try, and I've known multiple companies now have tried to implement FAIR, and they get stuck. They're like, okay, well, how much PII is on this machine? Well, have Joe Bob go down there and type in some commands. Joe Bob doesn't have access. Well, who does have? Well, Jim, I think, has access. No, he's on vacation. And like 3 weeks later, you get the answer to one question. You know what I mean? And so in theory it works. It's just in practice, it's just way too clunky, and there are way too many moving parts. So I think the answer is there needs to be a piece of automation built into everything that we're doing that basically pulls in this information and provides a relative value. So people will very much dislike this, but you can value assets just like you can value a car. So if I go up and I say, this car, this old jalopy, it's worth $1 million. You're like, no, it isn't. Like, no, it isn't. It just isn't worth that. Well, why isn't it worth that? Well, we all have both an instinctual knowledge of what jalopies are worth, but also you can go look at Kelley Blue Book. Well, where did they get that information? Well, they got it from resale value. They got it from this statistic and that statistics. We can get close. We can't get perfect. But what if I were to tell you that JFK was his body stashed in the thing, and I got all this and there's half a ton of cocaine in there and whatever. And okay, maybe it is worth that. Maybe it is actually worth $1 million, right? So that context actually really, really matters. So you're going to get it wrong, and this is where people are not going to like this. They're not going to like being wrong. No one likes being wrong. So it's going to be wrong in one and two completely different ways. One is people are going to estimate the value of things are going to be way too high. So an example would be, like, let's say a bunch of developers install all types of stuff on this one machine. So there's like lots of PII on it. They're testing, all this stuff's on there. So I go in there and it has lots of PII or something that looks like PII anyway. Has a bunch of apps on it, lots of services. It's connected to a lot of things because it's a dev environment. But the full replacement cost is actually basically nothing. They just re-upload the Docker install and it's fine, right? It's exactly where it needs to be. So there's the full replacement cost is basically nothing, and I just told you it's worth billions of dollars or whatever, right? Well, obviously you can go in and tweak these knobs. You have to be able to tweak the knobs. On the low end, you can get it wrong by let's say it's like Cisco.com or something, and they have an API server that handles all transaction data. Well, Cisco.com makes about $1 billion a year through their website. $1 billion a year. But I'm looking at something and it's like, well, it's this tiny little web interface. It's like, looks like it's running Apache or something and there's nothing on it. I can't see anything on it. Well, I'm gonna say it's worth virtually nothing, but it's like, it's worth $1 billion to us if this thing goes down. Like, it's really, really important, or some percentage of $1 billion if it's down for some percentage of time. So understanding the different variants of outages, whether it's down, is it really out, or is it broken, which would be really bad, or is it compromised where you're actually able to extract data and hurt reputation. So all these different variants of being down or out or damaged all have different sort of damage potential. Long way to say it's complicated. Really, really complicated. But it doesn't help that no one in the room is working on it, right? No one in the room is working on this problem. They're working on pieces of it possibly, but not the whole thing. Like, how do we get in front of this? Like, I hear some people talking about the hiring problem. Like, well, you know, we'll start like an internship program. No. You just now increased more cost into companies who now have to train these interns who are not going to work for you. They're gonna see you and go, thank you for all that information, and go work somewhere else. Like, how does that help your company? You've just taken people off the line to train people. You've become a mini university, and you're not gonna get any value out of them because they have no expertise. So, there's some real existential problems here, and I don't actually have great answers for any one of these things, but I do know that they're fundamentally broken from the ground up. Yes?
Hey, I didn't fully understand the example you gave earlier about the early stage startup, fix all the vulnerabilities.
Okay, so assuming you have a graph on the vertical axis, you have the expected value of loss post-compromise, which is the cost of the bad thing happening times likelihood. On this axis, on the vertical axis, you have the cost of remediation pre-compromise. So let's say you plot everything in the world fits on that graph, every single thing, like everything from nuclear submarines, thank you very much, everything from nuclear submarines getting taken over to you getting a paper cut. Everything fits on that graph somewhere, right? So let's say at a very small company that is not publicly traded, they eventually want to go public or eventually get acquired, which means that they're going to sell times earnings, whatever that times earnings is. But if they have liabilities in their company, like a bunch of exploits sitting out there that the potential acquirer can find using internal attack surface management, and by the way, this is already happening, so congratulations if you aren't paying attention to this, you are very much behind the times. Then what's going to happen is the liabilities are going to count against your valuation. So if they can say, well, the valuation of the liabilities also has a multiple, it shifts everything up on the graph by whatever the multiple is. Not everything is a 10x multiple. I've seen multiples as high as 30x in some cases. Just depends on the industry. So just pick whatever your multiple is in your industry.
So as far as the due diligence process, is where you're going to lose that money.
Yes. So, okay, brief aside, because this is super interesting. So let's assume I take snapshots of a company over time, right? Bam, 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 taking it over time. And then I leak out to the company that I'm potentially interested in buying them, right? So what's going to happen is one of four things. Nothing. Number two is they're going to make some changes. Those changes are usually going to be patching. They're going to be running around trying to install patches because they've never patched anything since the dawn of time, which means they have like IT hygiene issues, which means they don't have good maturity, which means you're going to have to build a bunch of stuff on top of whatever they've currently built. They're just not a very well thought out company. You're going to have to do a lot of work to get them up to date. That's okay. A lot of companies have that problem. It's not one that's really worth worrying about. The other one is, and this has happened, and this has actually killed deals. This is a real story. I'm not making this up. This is a real thing. You'll see the amount of the infrastructure grow, and it was correlated with fake companies that they had contracts with. So it was designed to make it look like they have more customers than they had, which is fraud. And so on the flip side of that, and this also is a real story. This also really happened. This also killed a $1 billion deal. They saw the telemetry going along, and all of a sudden there was a drop. And they're like, well, what went away? Well, what went away was all the gambling sites where the company actually makes all their money. So they didn't want to tell them that they made all their money through gambling. And when they went away, when all those gambling sites went away, well, where are you really making your money? It looks like it's all coming from your customers. You're getting it all from gambling. So their books are all cooked. This is what we call corporate malfeasance. And you can detect it from the public internet. And big companies are starting to do this. So if you plan to get bought someday, you might want to think about that. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody.